Thank you so much. 안녕하세요. I don't know about you, but I think I'm way too young to have such a long introduction. You know, I really haven't done that much in my life. But thank you very much, Mr. Do, for that very, very kind intro. And also to KCCP for inviting me to speak with you this evening. You know, it's always heartwarming to see a gathering of so many Korean Americans. There are also non-Korean Americans in the room. But, you know, so in case you want to find out a foolproof way that I've learned to know if you're Korean or not. Do you notice how every time a Korean family gets together, they all start very nice, but soon, once the grandmother leaves, they all start bickering and yelling and getting all dysfunctional. Do you know why? Because there's no harmony in the room. For those of you who are not Korean, harmony means grandma in Korean. So lots of Kims in the room. Can I get a show of hands? Kims? All right, represent. How about Park? Park? Lee? Lee's? How about Yoons, like me? Yoons? Ah, it's getting more rare. How about Sung? Sung? A little more rare. So, you know, a friend of mine used to work for Apple, you know, Apple. And it wasn't a big deal that his last name was Sung. But it did happen that his parents had named him Samuel. So on his Apple ID badge at work, it said Samsung. So needless to say, he had a very short career at Apple. So, you know, our names say a lot about who we are. And so do the influences that we grow up with. And as Mr. Do said, I came to America when I was 6 years old. I grew up outside of Washington, D.C., and my memories of growing up in this country include often being the only Korean or the only Asian in the classroom. And for some of you, my childhood might sound very, very familiar. I'm sure you had some of the same experiences. We all took violin lessons or piano. I remember going to Korean school on Saturdays and then getting up to go to Korean church on Sundays. And then always wondering, why is my family eating kimchi and fish and miyeokguk, you know, instead of hamburgers like all my friends? And of course, I was raised with certain messages from my parents. I had to study very hard. Study and more study, because getting into the right college, that would be the ticket to success. And I remember always hearing my parents say to me in Korean, "너 1등 해야 돼." You have to be number one. That was the message of success. Also at home, I was taught that children should be quiet and obedient to their elders. And then outside of home, I absorbed an American culture that fed my independent spirit and taught me to express myself, value nonconformity, and question authority. And sometimes I felt like I was caught between two worlds, not sure who I am. Am I Korean? Am I American? Do I belong anywhere? And these were the kinds of questions that I couldn't really raise with my parents, because growing up, I knew my parents loved me, but I don't remember a lot of deep conversations with them because I was more comfortable speaking English and they were comfortable speaking Korean. So our conversations would be more like, 배고파? 밥 먹어야지. You know, are you hungry? Come on, have some food. That was their way of telling me that they love me. And of course, always, 너 공부해야 돼. 절대로 1등 해야 돼. You gotta study, and again, you gotta be number one. Does that sound familiar? I hear some laughter. So I want to talk about that 1등 mentality, that number one mentality. And it's a framework of success that I would like to just examine a bit tonight. So for many of us as immigrants or as children of immigrants, our focus in this country was on surviving. You know, for my parents' generation, it was about the basics. You had a roof over your heads, food on the table, and if you had a little bit left over, whatever it is, you put it into your children's education. Sound familiar? I see a lot of people nodding. But here we are today, 2015, in America, the Korean American community. So many of us have been blessed to move beyond worrying about short-term surviving to thinking long-term about thriving in this country. And it's time, I think, to re-examine our values of what success means. Because when you think about that 1등, number one mentality, it's sort of like you see yourself running in a race and you're running as fast as you can and you kind of peek over your shoulder. And the greater the distance between yourself and the rest of the pack, the more successful you are. And so it's an idea about distancing yourself. And but what about, instead of that mentality, we think about redefining our idea of success to be about how many people can you bring through that finish line with you. And I think to me, when I see an organization like KCCP, that is what you are doing in this community. Creating a place where more people can prosper and can be elevated and be connected together, not creating distance between yourself and the rest, but bringing them together. And that's why I'm so happy and proud to be a part of this evening. So as Mr. Cho mentioned, my bio includes the fact that I was the first Korean American television news reporter in New York, and I'm very proud of this. But for me, again, it has never been about being the first and only that defines success. It's really how many others can we open the doors for, help to mentor, and just elevate in the field, and how do we also work together to break down barriers in the workplace. So I want to share with you a story of when I started in the Channel 5 newsroom. This is like in the late 80s, early 90s. I was really like, you know, I was the lowest of the low. I was a production assistant, like fetching coffee for the anchor people and ripping scripts. But as I was doing all that menial work, my dream, my aspiration was to be Kani-chan. And I was going for that dream. So even though I was, you know, fetching coffee on my day job, when I had a day off, I would come in the newsroom and I would just study the scripts that all the reporters were filing that day. And I started to really identify who were some of the reporters that I thought their writing was really good. And I got up the courage to go ask them, it's my day off, but could I shadow you on a story? Could I follow you around? I'd like to learn from you. And you know, and for some of the young people in this room, you're going to find that when you ask people for help, some of them will be very nice and helpful, and some will not be. And you have to go with the ones that open doors for you. And a number of reporters in my newsroom were really kind to me, and I will never forget the ones that took me out under their wing, helped to teach me on how to be a reporter. But sadly, the truth is that the one reporter who was perhaps the least helpful or nice to me was the one Asian reporter in that newsroom. And at the time, I remember thinking, you know, whatever, that she's not a nice person. But when I look back now, I understand. You know, because it wasn't written down anywhere, but everybody kind of knew that there was one spot for an Asian reporter in that newsroom. And so why should she want to help me. Here I was, really like younger and ambitious, very hungry, aggressive, coming up. And I'm sure she felt threatened by me, and so she had no reason to be helpful to me. And in fact, it was when she left and moved to another market that I actually got promoted, and I got that spot. But I bring this up because another thing happened in that newsroom. This is like in the late 80s, early 90s. There was an organization that was formed around in the late 80s called the Asian American Journalists Association. And they every year had a conference and a gala dinner. And that year they came to New York. And every news agency had to buy a table, kind of like this. It'd be like CBS and CNN and NBC. And Fox Channel 5, my news director, was under pressure to buy a table. He had to show up. And all of a sudden it became important to him that he could fill 10 seats at that table with Asian staff. And I saw myself, I had been totally invisible to him. I saw myself become visible. I saw him say, oh, we have Kyung, wonderful, Tipu, that's Asian, right? I mean, he started finding every Asian person that he could. And so the lesson for me was from this experience is that, yeah, we have to individually work really hard, the way I did, coming in on the weekend and preparing myself and trying to become an expert in my field. And so I can kind of, be doing that work individually. But organizationally, when my community, when Asian American journalists organized ourselves so that we could exert some influence from the top down and to exert a unified voice and a power to say that our community needs to be at the table or you need to bring a table, then it was very powerful. So it's not about just each of us trying to bang our way up through that ceiling, but also, so this is the micro work, but the macro work. That if we don't do that, then just like what happened to me, all we're going to do is set ourselves up to just compete with each other for the crumbs and the limited opportunities that other people are deciding that we should be allowed to have. So that was a very important lesson that I took with me since being a very young journalist. So it's really about thinking about individual success, but also community success. And so let's think about that. A lot of, again, young people in the room, when you look at your future, how do you see success? Do we think about that great job or the big promotion and maybe driving a nice car and maybe having a really big house? And there's nothing wrong with all of those. It's wonderful. It is the American dream. But what is beyond that in terms of the dream? Again, what can we do to think about beyond individual success to a community success? And that was the thinking behind a small group of Korean Americans who came together 13 years ago in the fall of 2002 at a dinner party at the home of the then Consul General from Korea. It was Consul General Won Cho. And he was very interested in bringing together what he saw as young people that he regarded as some of the most successful Korean Americans in New York City. So Juju Chang and I were there sort of as the Korean Americans in media. There are others, lawyers, investment bankers, doctors, who were at pretty high levels in their firms. And after the dinner, the Consul General challenged us with a question. He said, here you are, some of the most successful Korean Americans in New York. What have you done for your community? And I remember, we just looked at each other because most of us didn't know each other. Juju and I knew each other because of the journalism, but many of us were meeting for the first time. And the truth was that very few of us had even thought about doing something for our community. Because do you remember when we grew up, the message we got no 유등해라, be number one. Actually, the message that we took and ran with was almost like, get as far away from your community as possible. And the further away you get, the more successful you are. I think in some ways that's what we had kind of, inculcated in ourselves. And so it was kind of a startling moment for us. And because also, many of us were sort of in our bubbles and we didn't even know that there were much about our community, and we didn't know that there were so many struggles and needs in our community. So I was really moved to learn that 1 in 4 Korean American seniors over the age of 65 lives in poverty. Or that Asian American young women between the ages of 15 and 24 in this country, they have the highest rates of depression and suicide of any ethnic group. That Korean Americans have the highest uninsured rates in America, and as a result, by the time diseases are caught, they're much more serious because of the lack of early screening. So I really applaud Dr. Yi and the work that you're doing and here, with KCCP. So beyond this, because of the model minority stereotype that all Asians are doing really, really well, these issues are not talked about. They are not visible. They are invisible to corporate and foundation funders. So, where are the resources going to come from to help these organizations that are addressing these needs of these vulnerable populations? Our group, some of us, formed the Korean American Community Foundation with the goal of providing grants to nonprofit organizations helping the low-income, marginalized, vulnerable neighbors, not just in our Korean American community, but in the broader Asian communities, as well as building bridges to other ethnicities. And we started with a slogan and a philosophy, $1 a day for our neighbors. So for really less than a cup of coffee, that we could set aside something to help our neighbors. And it was really the philosophy that you don't have to wait till you're a millionaire to become a philanthropist. That it's really about getting in the habit of giving. And that as much as we would love a wealthy, philanthropist, individual to come and offer us $365,000 for our mission, that it was so much more doable and powerful for 1,000 of us to commit $1 a day. And that was the movement that we began. In 2003, by asking our friends and family and just, with this idea, we cobbled together $60,000 that we gave out to 5 community-based organizations. And as Mr. Joe said, this year, in our 12th year of funding, we just reached a little over $4.7 million in grants. And I'm proud to say that we, KACF, are not the only ones doing this work. The Beautiful Foundation is also doing a wonderful job in the Korean community, building bridges between those who have capacity and the desire to give back to those who have the needs. And again, KCCP, the work that you are doing to build community here, this is like a part of something that's really exciting. It's something that didn't happen and couldn't have happened in a way 20 years ago. Certainly not 30 years ago. Our community was not ready. But it is time to do it now. And another thing that's about the urgency of this work is that if we don't do it, we are a bridge building generation. My Korean's not that good, but I'm bilingual. Our children, they're not able to do this work. So this window is going to open and the window is going to close. And if we, the ones who've been so blessed and privileged to be at this place and time in Korean American history, if we don't lay these foundations down now, then it's going to be a real lost opportunity. So as our organizations, Beautiful Foundation, KACF, also KCCP, are setting out this bold vision to build philanthropy in the Korean American community, what makes us, all of us, different from other American philanthropists? It's this. Most of us know someone, maybe even in our own families, who couldn't get a professional job because of limited English proficiency. Or maybe we know someone, maybe it was our own father or mother, who chose to go without health insurance so that their child could go to school, had to make choices like that. And many of us know of families, again, maybe it was our own family, that struggled with breakdowns in culture and miscommunications in language that led to alienation within families and maybe without families. And we know that too, these are deep challenges, and we know that to address these kinds of problems and to create a positive impact, a positive change, the kind of deep, lasting change, the kind of change that transforms communities, this cannot be tackled alone. This requires a collective action, and that is why the mission of KCCP is so important and so urgent as we lay the groundwork, literally, to build and strengthen our community together for now and for the next generation. And why it's so important that all of you are here in this room tonight. So like KCCP, one of the ways that my organization, KACF, raises funds is holding an annual gala. Ours is in Manhattan. And it has, over the years, become an event that has really galvanized younger Korean Americans and helped to set the pace for fundraising in the Korean American community. So every year, our KACF Gala attracts about, close to 1,000 philanthropic and corporate leaders and supporters of the Korean American community. And I'm not trying to brag at all here, I'm just trying to give a context. Our speakers have included Mayor Bloomberg, Yoon Kim of the World Bank, Martha Cho, of the COO of the Gates Foundation. But in addition to these marquee names and speakers, every year we make a point to give a speech opportunity to a client of a grantee partner, someone whose life has been touched and transformed by KACF's grants. And when I look back, there have been a lot of speakers, but my favorite speaker is a woman named Mrs. Shin, who spoke at our gala a few years ago. Mrs. Shin had a son who was born with severe developmental disabilities from cerebral palsy. She spoke about how she felt when she gave birth to this child. She was bewildered, overwhelmed, angry, and feeling very isolated because there's a part of Korean culture where there can be stigma and a kind of blaming of the parents associated with having a child that is not perfect or has disabilities. So Mrs. Shin talked about how important it was for her to find an organization, which she did, called Miral in Queens, that has programs not only for Korean American children with disabilities, but it provides a space and place for parents to meet and support each other. And she spoke about how much she came to rely on Miral for its services and the community that it created. And she also saw how the biggest challenge for a small grassroots organization like Miral was always about sustainability and not having enough funding. Mrs. Shin spoke about the difference that it made when KACF came in and started giving Miral grants year after year, significant grants. But the most powerful thing that she said was, that's why I am a $1 a day donor to KACF. See, she wasn't just standing there saying, thank you so much to the donors. She was saying, I am one of you. And to me, that was a huge moment. It brought everything back full circle for me, because it made me understand that there is no separate giver and receiver. Sometimes we receive, and we have all received. And there are times in our lives that we give. We think about it today, right here. We're all here today because someone gave and sacrificed for us. Often it's our parents or the first generation before us. And we are here because of their legacy and their investments in us as individuals. But what they couldn't do, because we said we weren't ready 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 10 years ago even, because we were still worried about surviving. We could not do the work that KCCP and other organizations are doing today. So how can we make sure that our investments and our legacy have even more impact moving into the future, beyond just investing in individuals, but in our community? Well, you have a golden opportunity right here in KCCP. And that is why my husband and I also filled this out, and we're making a contribution to KCCP tonight. It's not, it may not be so significant, but hey, if all of us, before leaving here tonight, think about making a little bit of a difference, it would be such a help. So, and I know that many of you have already contributed by coming to this dinner, but I ask you really to think about, can you do a little bit more? And maybe tonight is the night to do it. I highly encourage you. You will feel really good about that. And so, I ask you to commit to being a part of that full circle of giving and receiving. Not just about item, number one, but 360-degree vision of success. This is what a thriving community is all about, isn't it? It is one that helps us to give, to receive, to lift each other up, and to be counted as a totality of our community, to have our voices matter, and one that we can all be a part of contributing to strengthen our community strategically, and most importantly, to do it together. And looking ahead, let's all be the kind of harmony that creates a collective harmony. Thank you very much.